Hi, everyone. Happy evening or late afternoon. My name is Yvonne Quaresma. I am the founder of the Climate Journal Project. Climate Journal Project utilizes journaling as a powerful tool in helping alleviate any sort of anxiety or fear that you feel towards the environment and the state of the climate crisis. It is very normal to feel hopeless, but our goal here today is to start to feel hopeful and productive and connected, not only to the planet, but to each other and ourselves.
So it looks like a lot of folks have joined, and maybe a few more will continue to trickle in, but we will definitely come back to these thoughts. And I really appreciate Yvonne kind of starting us off with those really kind of thoughtful questions on where some of our climate emotions come from and what they're associated with. And as we move into discussions later in the evening, we can share that with one another. Like I said, you're welcome to share in the chat with one another, as well as kind of taking those questions forward and ruminating on them. And if people kind of joined a little bit later and didn't get a chance to get too much into it, we can go back there. But in the meantime, for those who have just joined, we're gathering here to delve into our climate emotions and share with one another our experiences kind of dealing with these times as they are. And so you've met Yvonne from the Climate Journal Project. You'll meet Adam Sachs and Abby Abrahamson, and the three of them will share a little bit of their stories. But first, I want to introduce Lisa Van Susteren, who is a psychiatrist and a writer and a thoughtful researcher on the mental health impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss and our general state of environmental degradation. Lisa has investigated this issue and written on it in depth, and she's kind of providing some of the grounding for what we're doing here today, because we're coming from Bio for Climate at this from the environmental angle, but without as much kind of knowledge of the mental health field. And so I have a couple of questions for you, Lisa, to get started, if that's all right.
Thank you very much. I have to say, I think we all appreciate your wonderful background. Very much biophilic design at its best. So thank you.
I appreciate that. So just to kind of get started, I'm wondering how you got into this question of kind of the environment meets mental health, and where that journey began for you.
I'll give you the short version. No one wants the long version. I ran for the United States Senate in Maryland in 2005. And it still bothers me, believe it or not, but I obviously did not win. But during the course of that campaign, I saw Bill McDonough's movie, it was a documentary, The Next Industrial Revolution. And I was so blown away and exhilarated at all of what he was talking about in nature and how things fit together. And in addition, recognizing that from a physical health perspective as a doctor, that we were designed by nature over billions, millions of years, and that this is our true home, and that we're not living a life consistent with that design, and that this is causing us so much stress. And I deal with stress for a living. And the idea is that you address behaviors that are not doing you any good now, so that you can correct them for the future. So that's at the epicenter of, I would say, the climate battles. And that is correcting our mistakes so that we can all thrive and survive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely rings true for a lot of people. And how to live with our climate emotions is also about how to do things in spite of them sometimes. So I guess related to that, when we were coming up with the title for this event, we thought about using the term climate anxiety. And that was kind of where we started. But we felt that this term kind of leaves out some of the many other emotions that are related to climate change, awe for the natural world, for example. And I'm wondering if there's anything else that you feel is missing from this term or from the field in general.
Well, yes, climate anxiety has been sort of the dumping ground for all of the feelings that we have. And you're right, there is also awe, because we do have a tendency to sometimes appreciate what we might be losing. Mm-hmm. And when we realize what the natural world brings, that does tell us that this is not only the scarce resource, but the sacred responsibility. And that also gives you a sense of purpose. So there's awe, there's purpose, there's the connection. Not to make this shallow, but I would have lived in a very different environment in the last 15, 20 years that I've been doing this, had I only been doing my work. Now I've met the most amazing people from all walks of life, so determined, so dedicated, even when they're grief-stricken and angry and fearful. And so there's much more to this experience than just climate anxiety. Of course, we know there's eco-grief, there's all of the other emotions. But let us not forget also, sorry about that. Let us not forget also that in the midst of all of this darkness, we're here, we don't know why, but it is a unique responsibility that can weigh heavily, but it's also an opportunity.
That's very well said. That's very well said. I think it's true. It certainly can weigh heavily. And so my third question is kind of, what role do communities and support systems and this kind of like sharing and storytelling play when processing with that overwhelm or that heaviness and these kind of wide range of emotions?
Well, it's absolutely key. And that's why I was so excited about what Biodiversity for Livable Climate is doing tonight, bringing people together, creating community. And it's not, we already know that a sense of community is something that can be comforting, but neuroscience even tells us we can do EEGs and see alpha waves in our brains. We know that reward centers are set off when we're together. We get a feeling of a certain ego dissolution. We don't feel as if we're so focused on ourselves. And that magic of being with other people does bring you to a triggering of that sense of awe, that you have a connectedness that sets off the reward centers, opioid receptors, which are painkillers even. This is a triggering event. And so telling our stories is such an incredibly comforting experience and way for us to normalize what we're going through. And I'll just say this, that every time we start now, our mental health professional, climate psychiatry lines, climate psychology, I always insist on a check-in so people can say where they are emotionally. It's unbelievable. We might be very different from one week to the other, but everybody's a lot the same. Boy, is that a comforting feeling. So hats off to you for doing this and for all the work that you do. And how important these stories are, because they tell us, they legitimize what we're going through, and they enable us to take the energy of those emotions and turn them into the action we know is critical.
I really appreciate that. And I certainly didn't have the chemical background for that before, but it's amazing to hear about. And thank you for kind of framing this event, because we are here to in part hear folks' stories, to hear from Abby and Yvonne and from Adam, their 3 different experiences, and also to share with one another each of our individual experiences. So I guess that kind of ushers us in nicely to hearing from Abby to start with. Abby Abrahamson is a kind of new addition to Bio for Climate as the newsletter editor and college outreach coordinator. And she is a lovely, thoughtful young woman that I will allow to speak for herself. So I guess, go ahead.
Thank you, Maya. Hello, everyone. I'm really grateful to be here with you all today, to have the opportunity to share a bit about my story, and also hopefully have the opportunity to hold the same space for all of you, especially in our breakout groups. So I guess to just start right off sharing a little bit about my story with climate anxiety or climate emotions, I think one of the most important things to know is that I'm 20 years old. So I was born in 2001, about a month before 9/11. I think that really shaped my life and also my peers as well. And so growing up, especially as I entered later in elementary school and then going through the rest of, K to 12 and college, I think I always heard about climate change, like ever since I was like, I don't remember a time where I hadn't heard about climate change. And I think that's a really unique thing to me and my age group. And so to me, for a long time, climate change was kind of normalized, not in the sense that climate changing is a normal thing, but in the sense that I always expected it to be a part of my science curriculum. And it was never something that I doubted existing. It was something I always knew was a fact. And ever since I was in elementary school, I knew I would be kind of dealing with it for the rest of my life. The only difference is that as I grew older, I began to realize more and more how significant climate change would be. So, for example, I remember like in 5th grade science class learning about the fact that climate change existed and it didn't seem as threatening. It kind of was presented to my class as a very matter of fact thing. And that's very different to where I am now. I'm a senior in college and I learn about climate change. And I have 2 majors, sociology and environmental studies. And I learn about it in both majors, most of my classes. And there it's presented as a very urgent situation that's really centered around panic. And I remember, I think that my first, collision with anxiety around climate change or some sort of disturbing emotions around climate change was a few years ago. I remember having read articles, especially shared from my friends on social media, hearing the term climate anxiety pop up for the first time. I was like 13 or 14. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't completely understand exactly what people are talking about. Like, I've learned about climate change, and I don't feel like this feeling of anxiety, which I think kind of speaks to what was mentioned a few minutes ago, where it's not just feelings about anxiety around climate change. I realized over time that I also feel like fear and grief, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of guilt, things like that. And I think the first time I actually felt straight on anxiety was I was lying in bed one night trying to go to sleep. And there's this podcast I really like, really great. It's called The Wild with Chris Morgan. And he goes around the world and records episodes in different aspects of nature. And I remember listening to this one particular podcast where he was recording in Alaska. And instead of sitting there actually relaxing, listening to the sounds of nature in Alaska to go to sleep, it just suddenly hit me that that episode, that place that he was recording was not going to sound the same at another point in my lifetime. And that I may not actually have the opportunity to go there and to see what he was describing and recording because of climate change. So all that being said, I also kind of wanted to talk a little bit, I guess, about the more positive side of this, or at least a positive solution. For me, a long time ago I heard this saying, if you get nervous, focus on service. And it's kind of all encompassing saying, I think, not just for nervousness, but a lot of other things. But throughout my, I guess awakening to climate issues and climate anxiety and climate emotions, that's kind of stayed in the back of my head. And so advocacy and activism has been a huge part of a coping mechanism or tool for me to deal with all of these emotions and fears and things around climate change. So doing climate advocacy in a variety of capacities since I was a teenager, and especially coming here to Bio for Climate, which has been the most hopeful form of activism that I've experienced so far. That's also been something that's been really helpful to me for dealing with that. So I kind of wanted to close with that, mention that it's not all terrible. Like Maya said, there are also feelings of awe and inspiration that come with climate and the environment and nature as a whole. But yeah, I guess that's a bit about my story.
Thank you, Abby. It's really lovely to hear that and to learn things about you that I didn't know before. And thank you for leaving us with that wonderful motto. If you get nervous, turn to service. I will keep that with me. We are also going to hear from Yvonne, who some of you met earlier when she shared a journal prompt. Yvonne is one of the founders of the Climate Journal Project, which is an amazing movement to try and metabolize some of the climate emotions that people are dealing with through a journaling practice. And Yvonne, if you're ready, we can kind of turn to you and hear a little bit more about yourself.
Yes, Maya, thank you for that introduction. I started the Climate Journal Project almost a year and a half ago, I would say. I actually pursued my master's in food studies. I didn't do my master's in culinary, but food studies is the intersection between food insecurity and food waste. And I studied and researched and tried to answer the question, basically, why are there still people that are hungry when we have so much food waste? And so about 3 years of grad school at NYU, and I was set to walk the stage, graduate May of 2020. But if you all recall, a few months before 2020, the pandemic happened. And at that time, I was actually working on a mobile application that helped folks identify local, environmentally friendly restaurants in their area. So about 3 years of doing that. But of course, when the pandemic hit, all of my restaurant partners were closed, unfortunately. A lot of the initiatives, the funding that was pushing forward all of these amazing projects was cut overnight. And unfortunately, that's not an exaggeration. It really felt like I woke up and all of these initiatives were gone. And so I found myself flying from New York back to California. But I think the beauty in that is while I heard, so much sadness, felt so much sadness, I was in my childhood bedroom, as many were, and I was surrounded by these old diaries. I used to call them diaries, and they were half written in, and I picked them up and decided to write, and I started to journal. And so I felt like it was a transformative period where I moved back into my parents' house, was back in my childhood bedroom. Even the way I describe these diaries to journals, it was really a symbol of my transformation. And I dedicated these journal entries and reflections to the environment. I'm going to be honest, I doubted the movement. I doubted if my time in grad school was worth it. I was disappointed in the movement. I was disappointed in myself. You know, it was a time of grief, really. But through the journal practice, I discovered that social and environmental impact will always remain extremely important to me because of my background. My parents are Filipino American. I have visited the Philippines more times than I can count. And while you all see beautiful photos of islands, if you visit in person, plastic pollution, water pollution, air pollution is really detrimental, not only to my direct family members, but to folks in the streets, Filipinos all over about thousands and thousands of islands. And so it's kind of wild to me that it took me 26 years and a few journal entries to really connect those pieces. But journaling really helped me articulate why climate change is an issue that I am dedicated to finding solutions for. And it's really interesting how the journal practice not only helped me articulate, but it helps me release all of that stress somewhere in a healthy way. And so because it was so powerful for me, I started to invite friends from grad school, friends from my hometown, environmentalists to join me in this daily journal practice. And that's how the Climate Journal Project was born. And what was really interesting was within 2 weeks, it was just by word of mouth, within 2 weeks, there were 250 people journaling with me from all over the country, Malawi, Africa, Thailand, Brazil, the UK. So it felt, that feeling of I'm not alone, and this feeling of, yeah, it was anxiety, but it was more so, it was really hopelessness. I really didn't understand what direction, I was supposed to go. I had also felt like I had poured my heart and soul into food and food waste. But I think the universe had such great plans for me. And the Climate Journal Project has now become a physical book. So here is one of our journal books. Folks can actually follow along. There's a journal prompt dedicated per week. That wouldn't have been possible with all the folks just supporting me online, folks that I haven't met before, joining a newsletter. So yeah, we had evolved from it was just me behind a laptop sending a journal prompt to people. And now we are quite big and quite in many different countries. And I think that to summarize, I guess my story is that even if it feels like rock bottom sometimes, and many times it will, only because the nature of the climate crisis, unfortunately, will not be solved overnight. Even though it feels like we are in the deepest and darkest, most bottom area of this issue, there are plenty of people that will help you and plenty of people that you can connect with that can actually show you the light. And I say this at every single event that I host. Internal healing is the very first step towards planetary healing. We can only be the best climate activists we can be if we understand why we are doing it and we understand the importance of it. And it really starts within. And so that is what I had to do. And I really hope that through this project, we can inspire folks to not only start a journal practice, but really start reflecting and taking care of yourself, because you are also part of the planet. So the more you want to protect the planet and fight for the planet, the more you also have to remember that you're part of that too. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to kind of hear your story, and thank you for sharing your process. Yeah, and kind of finally to wrap up from a very different perspective, a story on climate activism that I'm sure has more similarities than we can imagine. let's hear from Adam, Adam Sachs is the executive director at Bio for Climate, but kind of has a long and storied history of different careers and activities and advocacy.
Thank you, Maya. I'll tell a little bit of that going back to June 4th, 1945, when I was born at the tail end of the most destructive war in human history. Up to 85 million deaths, mostly civilians, genocides, starvation, massacres, disease, a brave new world of the unbelievable, devastating power of atomic weapons. The suffering of people, animals, forests, and oceans still defies belief. But once peace descended, it brought merely a pause. The war against ourselves and perhaps the most remarkable planet in the universe took on a new face, but continued to gain ground and force. Into this pool of chaos, I was born. Even before I knew the history, I somehow sensed the global destruction. How could I not? Our neighbors were Holocaust refugees, existence reduced to a number tattooed on their arms, relentless grieving for their passionate earlier lives, which were twisted and discarded. All of that was inevitably becoming a part of me, my awareness, my sense of safety and self. How could it not? I remember when I was about 7 years old, I had a recurring fantasy that I would stand up before the United Nations and plea for an end to wars and hatred. The delegates would look at me in astonishment, slap their foreheads and declare, "Oh my God, this child is right. How could we be so blind? We will see to it that the world changes its ways." But of course, it was, to quote Greta, merely blah, blah, blah. Another memory from October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union was deploying nuclear weaponry to the island to our south. We were sailing to confront them, and I was a freshman at the City College of New York. When the tension was at peak, a friend and I spent an interminable moment staring at the pristine blue sky on a beautiful fall day. We had nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, and it all could have been over in one horrific moment. Now here I am, 50 years later, talking to you, and we're still at war with ourselves. It's as terrifying as ever, and we continue under the increasing and possibly terminal environmental threats to our very existence. Why am I telling you this? Because as overwhelming and distressing as the present moment is, it's not new to human experience. We have been struggling with dire emotions, climate or otherwise, forever. Imagine, for example, the end of the world crises endured at the hand of European explorers by indigenous peoples of this continent, or of Africans hauled through the Middle Passage, torn from their families, looking forward to a life of they knew not what, but almost certainly of terror and further emotional and likely ongoing physical torture. Global warming may be a bit different as it threatens the end of human everything, not just the end of our own lives, but the end of all that we love as well. That hurts differently from our own demise, which we well know is inevitable. In any case, history, personal and global, offers a useful perspective. We are truly not alone. We don't need to go through this chapter of human existence alone. Our experience is shared. We all have the company of our sisters and brothers of many nations and many ages. And this company is welcome and to be celebrated for all it has to teach us, teaching us of successes and failures and what we need to survive, even to thrive. We can learn that there may be joy amid grief, courage during terror, beauty lurking in piles of trash, hope when all seems lost, happiness mingled with despair. Our climate emotions aren't simple, aren't just about anxiety, nor should they be. We are each a universe, embracing brilliant rainbows as well as deep, dark pits. We have all of these feelings until our very last breath. Finally, we have Mother Nature, whose wonders and beauties, though at times terrifying and overwhelming, hold all the answers to our questions. She is sometimes stern, sometimes loving teacher. We have only to pay attention, listen, and learn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate your perspective and that of each of you, Abby and Yvonne as well. I'm wondering, Lisa, if any of this kind of rings a bell from your work with folks on this.
Well, I won't take long. I'll just say a couple words because I know that we're a little bit behind and I want to make sure that people have time to speak themselves. Right. So I'll just say that this is an unusual group in that people in this group are different because not everybody does pick up on his or her emotions, and not everybody is ready or can share them. And this is a group, obviously, that has come together and is able to share them. And certainly these powerful three personal narratives that I'm very grateful for having been, in a sense, for having had them, that there would be the confidence to share, that there's the sense of trust. And I hear and feel the excitement of the resourcefulness, because despite the obvious loss, and no one's minimizing any loss here, this is a group that has taken that loss and been extraordinarily resourceful, taken all the energy of those losses and redirected them into constructive action. Boy, is that a thrill. And we keep on doing that, and we keep on, more and more of us keep on doing it, and we keep on doing it faster. Well, that's the corrective journey. And so I'm impressed mostly with the authenticity here and with the transformative effect of this determined resourcefulness that's turned everything into the feelings of dedicating oneself to remedies.